Hi, everyone. This is Andrew,
And this is Laura.
and you are listening to Sunday School Dropouts. We are back with another touchstone episode today. We're going to be talking about spiritual abuse, adverse religious experiences, and the difference between abuse and trauma.
Woohoo. Just light, easy stuff. But before we get into that, we are going to take a moment and have some flannel graph story time. So, Andrew, for story time today, how about you share with us? What are you reading or listening to? Kind of where are you at?
Oh, so currently, well, and by currently, I mean just this last 24 hours, I started listening to this new artist I discovered. His name's David Kushner.
Hmm.
Are you familiar with him at all?
The name sounds familiar, but tell me more about him.
Well, he's very new, and I only
Okay.
know him because he went viral on TikTok. Um, so
Gotcha.
any of you who are listening, just look up the song "Daylight" by David Kushner, and you'll probably be like, "Oh, that song." Okay. I just like his style. I just found I liked the song that was on the
Mm,
TikToks that I was hearing. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go find out who this guy is, and so I just looked him up,
nice.
and it turns
Yeah.
out he's actually from the Chicago suburbs, like near where my fiance's from. Like I actually know exactly where he's from, and
That's
he's
awesome.
just a young guy. And he went from Chicago out to, I think he's in LA now, just doing music. He's
Mm,
like 22 or 23. But what I do like, at least in what I've listened to him of his so far, is just a lot of the stuff he does sing about just really resonates with my own deconstruction. And just, I mean, he
mm,
definitely kind of has like God and spirituality mixed throughout some of his stuff, but in a way that resonates, at least for me. Not saying
mm.
it'll resonate with everybody, but
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that to kind of be what this artist was about, and so started listening,
Yeah.
and
I
I've
love
been
that.
liking it. I'll probably listen to it like absolutely to death, and then can't stand him by like midsummer or so. But for right now, I'm
Okay.
enjoying it. So yeah.
Is that how you do it with your music? It's like
Oh
you
yeah.
wear it out. Okay.
Yes, yes. It's yes. If I find a new song or a new artist I like, I have to just I have to
Yeah.
listen to it until I cannot stand them anymore. And then
Okay.
I'll maybe circle back in like 18 months. So
Hey, yeah. Sometimes we got to like go to the extreme and then we can pull ourselves back to the balance. I love it.
yes. Yep.
That's
Absolutely.
cool. I'm totally going to look them up though. That's for sure. I'll actually have to go on to TikTok, I'm sure. Yeah, that's cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But what about
Yeah.
you though? What are you reading or listening to?
So I am, well, technically listening to, but reading um the book Spare by Prince Harry. I don't know if you have read it or are,
No.
familiar with it. It's
Yeah.
been so good. I'm not one of those people that are like super invested in like the royal family or the scandal around that too. But I feel like it's always been a part of my life, like I remember when Princess Diana died. And I remember as like a little girl, my mom's like, "Oh, you should marry Prince William because we're very close in age." And I'm like, "Yeah, mom, he's a prince. Like I'm I'm this like little girl at a Christian camp. There's no way we're gonna like cross paths." So I feel like there's always been like this uh weird connection or whatever to the royal family, but I haven't super kept up with like the Harry and Meghan story, but a little bit ago I decided to watch their documentary on Netflix and it was very interesting to me. And so then decided to start listening to the book, which I really like because Prince Harry reads it. And there's something about like the author, reading their own book that feels really powerful. And not that everything I read or listen to has to be about like deconstruction and cults and trauma and those sorts of things, but sometimes it just like comes into your pathway.
Hmm.
And so it's been really interesting to hear like both through the documentary as well as this book, just the dynamics of power and control within the royal family, and really I guess I would say some of the cult dynamics
Mm-hmm.
that are present just in terms of like where your allegiances lie and different expectations and how stories how narratives are crafted. And I think too, like so to hear that is really interesting, but then to also hear a lot of like the behind the scenes stuff of like this is a real person and this is a real relationship and these are real lives and people with feelings and people who are trying to do good in the world sometimes or grappling with things like oppression and racism and classism and capitalism and like trying to figure out ways to make right for things that have been done in the past. And it's been a really interesting book to read. And I would probably recommend it to anybody. I was actually at my my hairdresser's appointment, and she had asked if I had read it. I was like, yeah, I'm listening to it. And I was like, have you? And she's like, yeah, I like read it twice and listened to it 3 times. And
Oh,
that's
wow.
like how invested, but it's really good. And she was just saying she's picked up on a lot more the more she's read it. And I don't think I'm going to read it again, but it's true. Like you pick up on different dynamics. So that is what I have been technically listening to, but I guess I call it reading because it is a book. So it's been awesome.
Yeah, no, that
Yeah.
sounds really interesting. And is just speaking to like cult dynamics and like some of the similarities. I hadn't really thought of it
Mhm.
that directly before, but you're right. Like
Yeah.
the importance of like image. And if you say
So
this,
much.
how is that going
Yeah.
to, well, in the case of Harry, like how is that going to reflect
Mhm.
the image of the royal family? And it's who,
Yeah.
and the people that you're supposed to protect that you need to just
Yep.
be
Yeah.
deferring to. And oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
that totally makes me think of high
Yeah.
demand religion, and then families in
Yes.
high demand religion
Yeah.
of like, these are things we keep
Mhm.
amongst the family, we
Yeah.
keep it amongst ourselves. You don't go airing your dirty laundry to folks outside the group,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And even like they talk, he talks a lot about this like expectation of like, the royal family obviously gets their money from the people, like the taxes and things like that. And it's this like unspoken expectation that because we pay your salary, essentially, like we have free access to your life, whether the information we're sharing is true or false, like it's just the price that you pay, which I think is also like very culty. And
Mm-hmm.
the parts too that have really been so interesting to me is like in that dynamic is him also sharing his process of grieving his mother, and like the way that back when it happened, because gosh, he would have been so like what, 1997 I think, or 98 is when she died, and so that would have put him early adolescence. So to hear like the expectation of like how to deal with loss and grief and not really having a lot of support, and how he really had to like numb himself and shut things down, to navigate, because he didn't have anybody to help him through that. And he talks a lot about the benefit of therapy and being accurate and honest with what his experiences are, and truly grieving. And that part was so powerful. Like there's some really pivotal moments in the book where he starts to realize like, oh my gosh, yeah, like my mom's never coming back. And it just really humanizes him. And I think, we don't always think about that. Like in dynamics of power and control, you don't always think about the humans that are participating in that or trying to get out themselves and trying to do right, even though they may have been the ones that have harmed in the past. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's been a really fascinating book to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I need to check that out.
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely. Cool. Well, this has been good story time.
It has, yeah. I know, I always like, it's always like something new I need to add to the list, to like
I
add to
know.
my stack of books of things that I want to read, and
Exactly.
my to read list is probably about as high as a doorway, like,
Yeah,
my
I know.
apartment. So
I'm really trying to not buy
it's
more
great though.
books, and it's
Yeah.
not working.
It's a lost
uh,
cause. Just buy the books.
yeah, exactly. At least they look good on my shelf. So, well, we will catch up with story time then again at our next episode.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody, it is time for some prayer requests. Today, it is just me who is doing the prayer request for this episode because Andrew has been having some internet difficulties. But don't worry, he is sending his thoughts and prayers from afar. And so today, I'm going to just go ahead and share what the Lord is placing on my heart. As I'm recording this, it's the first week of July, which means that for those of us who are in the United States, we've just had a holiday celebration with the 4th of July, which of course we know is this country's birthday celebration. But to be honest, I was not in a celebratory mood. I'm finding it to be kind of difficult to celebrate a country when we've had the week that we have had legislatively. in the last week or so, maybe give or take a few days, we have rolled past the 1 year anniversary of the overturn of Roe v. Wade. More on that later. And the Supreme Court has made decisions about affirmative action and student loan debt, as well as First Amendment rights and free speech as it pertains to being able to turn away customers in creative venues if your beliefs, values, and morals don't align with the customer or potential customer. So there's so much that we could get into in regard to the specifics of those cases, but I actually think that there are far better resources than me out there. And so if you're interested in knowing the specifics of the various decisions that the Supreme Court in the United States has made over the last couple of weeks, I would highly recommend to you the podcast Straight White American Jesus with the hosts Brad Onishi and Dan Miller. They dig into the specifics of these rulings. And better yet, just join their Patreon, because you'll get sent links every single week to all of the research articles that they reference. And it is incredibly enlightening. So instead of talking about all of the various legislation that has been discussed and ruled on over the last several days, I thought that we could talk a little bit about Christian persecution, because, oh yes, it absolutely applies to all of the legislation that has been ruled on recently. So, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, one of the things that I was regularly taught was that I would be persecuted for my faith. It was something that was to be expected. And, as a kid growing up, that was going to mean that maybe my friends wouldn't understand, certain choices that my family made, or maybe they would make fun of me for having to go to church or wearing certain things or not being able to, wear the latest fads, or I would maybe be persecuted because I couldn't swear or wasn't supposed to use the Lord's name in vain. Growing up, it meant maybe I would be persecuted because I wasn't allowed to have a boyfriend or go to school dances or participate in certain, kind of age appropriate activities. And any sort of negative feedback that I would have gotten from my peers, or even a question of, like if somebody would have asked me, well, why can't you do X, Y, or Z? I was taught that was either overtly persecution, or it was like bordering on it. I remember I had one friend who was a Jehovah's Witness, and of course we had to be like loosely affiliated because we both thought the other person was in a cult, but we followed all of the same rules. And so we would talk about that sometimes kind of like in secret, and that word persecution often came up because we believed that the rest of our friend group was persecuting us because we believed differently, something like that. I can look back now and I'm just like, I feel for us. Younger middle school Laura was trying so hard. But like I said, I grew up with that message that I was going to be persecuted. And in fact, being persecuted was actually kind of this badge of honor that you got to wear. It meant that the devil was scared of you. You were doing something right. You were being this witness for God. And yeah, the devil was scared of you because your light was shining so bright that he needed to actively send people your way to dim that light. And so I believed that. And I think a lot of people were told that. And I think that that's like a power and control tactic. It's kind of one of these things where you start to believe that the more persecuted you are, the holier you become, and almost to the point where you might seek out those opportunities. I know I witnessed that. I know I probably did that too, kind of, seeking out situations where I would start conversations or go into different environments where I knew that if I spoke up and said what I thought or believed, people would look back at me or ask questions, kind of at the oddity of what I was believing. And yet I did that because I was part of my witness. And if I was persecuted, then all glory be to God, right? But, we see it like in this legislation, right? People that are making up these phantom scenarios of fake people in fake, needing fake services in order to get their ideas, their values pushed through court, all the way up to the Supreme Court. Because they are believing that they're being persecuted for their faith. They're being forced to serve people, to do things that they don't believe is right. And of course, in this case of I guess what we're calling the phantom case of dealing with like First Amendment rights and free speech, of course, we know that this was all made up. Although it does kind of mirror and mimic the case from several years ago, also in Colorado, of the baker who was asked to bake a wedding cake for a gay couple. And so this was kind of this case that that was just ruled on was kind of piggybacking off of that other case. But again, there's many other people who can speak to that more than I can. But I was thinking about this idea of people making up scenarios, and even my own experience, like earlier in life, like this persecution complex, really, like what does that lead to? And all I can come up with time and time again is white Christian nationalism. So I know I've already recommended the podcast Straight White American Jesus, which of course that's a very sarcastic title, but I highly recommend the podcast. But I also recommend one of the podcast hosts, Brad Onishi, has a book that came out earlier this year. Was it this year or last year? Called Preparing for War. And he really does a nice job of talking about the marriage between religion and politics. And so I've learned a lot personally from him and from that podcast. But, as I've been reflecting the last, week or so over what's been happening in the United States, I've thought a lot about my own history and what I was taught growing up. I don't know yet the average age of our listeners, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And so, in my earliest years, I was taught that the United States was a country that was founded on religious freedom, that we were escaping the religious tyranny of England. I mean, I wasn't, taught that this land was stolen from Native Americans or the genocide that occurred as a result, but that's a different story for a different day. But I was taught that we were founded, that the reason that people came to the United States was for religious freedom. And in my earliest years, it was never specified what that religion was. I came from a family that deeply valued education. Many of the members of my family are educators and deeply involved in school systems. And so that like educational integrity was a priority. So I did learn that the United States was a place of refuge for those that wanted religious freedom to be able to worship God, whomever or whatever God was, in the way that was important to them. But as I reflected back, somewhere in my late elementary, early middle school years, which would have been like the late 80s, early 90s, the message changed. And it changed to that we were a nation that was founded on the notion of religious freedom for Christians, Christian freedom, Christian liberty. And I can look back now and put the pieces together of like how those messages changed as it pertains to the political culture of the time. And again, read Brad Onishi's book, Preparing for War. He goes into this far more in depth than I can or should on a podcast like this. But it was just this message that subtly shifted, that it wasn't religious freedom that this country was founded on, but that the religion that it was founded on was Christianity. And therefore, that should be reflected in everything from politics to social justice to celebrity culture, all of these different areas of culture. And it really became this motivating factor of this drive for evangelical Christians to not only infiltrate government, but to impose their beliefs and standards and values and rules on everyone, for this to be a Christian nation. And that is what the message started to transform into, was that this was a country that was founded to be a Christian nation. And those people who didn't want it to be a Christian nation were actually persecuting Christians. It's like they ignored the original, documents of what this country was, what the founding fathers talked about, and shifted that into like, oh, it actually was supposed to be a Christian nation. I don't know if I'm sure many of the people listening to this podcast have now watched the documentary on Amazon Prime called Shiny Happy People. If you haven't, I highly recommend it, though it is very difficult to watch, but it does start to crack the door open to see just how it happened that all of these different evangelical organizations started to rally together and create candidates and programs and funding for evangelical legislation to be pushed through. And this is where we get groups like the Moral Majority and the Religious Roundtable, founded by people like Jerry Falwell Sr. and Pat Robertson, who we talked about on the last episode, Paul Weyrich. They all banded together to create these really powerful voting blocks, and so that they could pass their legislation through and get their candidates into office so that they could, quote unquote, turn the nation back to God. Because again, not having this nation being turned back to God meant that the persecution of Christians was alive and well. And, this has been happening for decades. This process of turning the nation back to God in the way that our government operates, and then how that kind of spills down into the intricacies, like on the ground level, through our government. It's been happening for decades. It really has. But, I think one of the most overt ways that we saw it really was June 24th, 2022, when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I'm not going to get into the morality of abortion. I really believe that the overturning of this legislation was about so much more than that. I can say for myself personally, that was one of the most difficult days of my life, because I saw as a woman that it was an obvious, overt step to limit the rights of me and my body and half the people in this country. And so many people have turned a blind eye to that. But there were so many of us that knew that that was just the first step in so many other people's rights being overturned, so many other marginalized groups, their lives, their livelihoods, their rights being gone after. And I think that's what we started to see even more of on the year anniversary of Roe v. Wade being turned over, was that even more people's rights, even more marginalized groups that had previously fought so tirelessly for protection of themselves and other people, and we saw their rights being turned over. And what I keep coming back to is like, why is this? Yes, of course they're wanting to turn the nation back to God, but it's because they believe they're truly being persecuted. And that is what justifies all of these actions. If I'm being persecuted, or if I've made up a narrative that I'm persecuted, then it gives me rights to be able to react and respond in a way that is defensive and protective. And I can use my God, my higher power, as the ultimate authority, arbiter, and permission giver, for why it's okay for me to go after other people's livelihoods, other people's rights. And it's because I don't want to be persecuted. So anyways, I know this is a little bit different prayer request time, but so often during prayer requests, it's all about just sharing what's on our heart, right? What the Lord is speaking to us. And so, that's what's been on my heart. And I guess I can just close it out there. So all God's people said, amen.
So today we are going to be talking about one of our touchstone topics, and that is, what is religious and spiritual abuse? how is it similar? How is it different to trauma? How is it,
Mm-hmm.
what are adverse religious experiences? Like when we say that, what are we talking about? And these are questions like I definitely get from folks,
Yeah.
both in terms like professionally, but also just DMs on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Definitely it's stuff that's really worth talking about. And I think
Yeah.
it's important because things like religious trauma, for example, like
Mm-hmm.
terms like that, or spiritual abuse, or church hurt, as the case may be.
Yeah.
These terms get thrown around a lot. And I think it's important to know, what do we mean when we say them?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because otherwise, I mean, you could mean anything, and different people mean different
Yeah.
things, and depending on who you are and what your background is. So I
Yeah.
think these are great conversations to have. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, let's just start at the beginning. What is religious or spiritual abuse? I'm curious what your thoughts
Yeah.
are on that, Laura. How would you define
Yeah.
spiritual abuse?
I agree with you. These are good conversations to have. A couple weeks or a couple episodes ago, we talked about, what is religious trauma. And we used the phrase like religious trauma is not the thing that happens to you, but it's, the way your body, your nervous system
Mhm.
responds to the thing that happens to you. And I would put like religious or spiritual abuse or adverse religious experiences are the thing. They are,
Mhm.
kind of these instances or messages that we can point to. I don't think I can come up with an exhaustive list of like, here's all the things that classify as religious or spiritual abuse. But I would say, when I think about just abuse in general and look at like, what is the definition of abuse? Kind of one of the most basic definitions that I boil it down to is the use of something for for an unintended purpose, which of course can be a little bit subjective. But in this case, I would, if we say physical abuse is the using of your body or somebody else's body for an unintended purpose, like for harm, or verbal abuse is using your words for an unintended purpose of harm, right? And so when I think about religious and spiritual abuse, it would be taking things like doctrine, position, like spiritual authority positions, teachings, practices, beliefs, that are connected to the religion, and using them in such a way that is garnering power and control, that is harming people, that is impacting people negatively, causing maybe long-term impacts, maybe even trauma, um, practices, beliefs, things that are causing people to have a reduction in autonomy and voice and choice, the ability to like lead their own lives. It can also be things like fears of punishment, or if you don't abide by, certain practices and rules. It can be very abusive to say, yeah, well, when you don't do this, you're going to hell, you're going to be disfellowshipped, you're going to be disconnected or excommunicated. So the consequence piece also plays into that. I know that's not a super
Mhm.
succinct answer, because I think it is a really big topic, but I think that starts a conversation of like, what is religious or spiritual abuse.
Yeah.
I also think that it doesn't have to be from like a pastor or a ministry leader. It could be from anybody, really, like using religion, religious practices, those sorts of things in a way that is harmful towards another person. But
Mhm.
yeah, I know. Yeah, that's kind of how I start to conceptualize it. What would you add into that?
Because yeah, there's not really a super succinct
Yeah.
answer, but that's still a good answer though. What you said, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with all of that. I just, the thing with abuse, spiritual abuse, is this sounds almost redundant, but I mean, it's abuse in a spiritual religious context.
Yeah.
And so kind of the same with religious trauma. Like, it's trauma,
Hmm.
just the context of where it came from is
Absolutely.
religious or spiritual.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so it's kind of the same idea. And so I think to really define that and understand that, and that kind of leads us into conversations of power and control, dynamics like
Yes.
that, social dynamics,
Hmm.
doctrine, definitely. Like, so to get
Hmm.
specific, like eternal conscious torment, hell, the
Yeah.
doctrine of the judgment. That's a very common one that I can think right off the top of my head that I
Hmm.
absolutely consider abusive.
Mm.
Um, and it's not the only one. I mean, there's others as well. I think that the way
Yeah.
like um, most churches relate to human sexuality, so like purity culture, the expectations,
Hmm.
especially that are placed upon women, I absolutely think are abusive in many
Yeah.
cases, and turn in and can
Mm.
create situations that result in religious trauma in many cases.
Hmm.
Um, it's one of those things where, and I think it's important to mention too, like, this is so much of this is subjective, and it will look different for different folks. Like, I don't want folks to walk away saying or
Yeah.
thinking that, well, Andrew didn't mention this in his list of things, so I guess maybe I
Yeah.
don't know, that wasn't really traumatic, or that wasn't abuse what I went through. And
Mm-hmm.
this is not an exhaustive list that we're going to be putting out here, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we can definitely touch on themes of what makes things abusive, what makes things
Mm-hmm.
well, actually, what makes things an adverse religious experience. That was actually the next
Yeah.
piece that
Yeah.
I wanted to get to,
Yeah. Yeah.
about
Mm-hmm.
adverse religious experiences.
Yeah, I really favor that term in the sense that,
Mhm.
I think like colloquially, a lot of people, when they hear the term like spiritual or religious abuse, they go to kind of like the most extreme thing, right? Like
Yeah,
clergy sexual abuse,
right.
or like really kind of bizarre sacrificial ritualistic practices. And people are like, oh, well, that didn't happen to me. So, like probably not abuse. But also just the word abuse is a very strong word, right? So like to
It is.
say this is abusive, or you engaged in abusive behaviors or things like that, it can feel heavy to like categorize your experience as such. And so not that I not that we need to like soften terms or anything like that, but I know when we and I should clarify. So the term adverse religious experiences is a term that myself and another 2 or 3 other colleagues of mine coined a few years ago. So that's myself and Brian Peck, who is the co-founder of the Religious Trauma Institute with myself, and then Kayla Felton and Kendra Snyder, who are the co-founders of the Reclamation Collective. This was a term that we came up with, and we came up with it because of that the intensity behind the word abuse, and people not really feeling like that was an accurate word to describe their experiences. And so instead we thought, well, gosh, there's these adverse religious experiences, these experiences that so many of us have had that maybe wouldn't be categorized as abuse, even by definition, but
Mhm.
definitely had an adverse impact on us. And so that could be anything from like doctrine, teaching, purity culture, certain practices, certain experiences that you either participated in or were witness to. It could be practices at home, at church, with various people. And really kind of we're defining it as like things that are like undermining your autonomy, your individuality, that are, requiring you to give up parts of yourself to conform to the group or else, right?
Mhm.
And so I really favor that term because it feels like it's very expansive. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
be so narrowly defined, and it allows us to say like, hey, if we're going to talk about religious or adverse religious experiences, and we're going to talk about these 5 things or whatever, like it's not exhaustive. So if your experience was adverse, it was adverse. Like we don't have to qualify it with anything else other than just you giving validity to what your experience was.
Mhm.
So I tend to prefer that. And I think that it has resonated with a lot of people because that feels maybe like a closer representation of what it is that happened to them.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. No, I really appreciate that. And I
Mhm.
think that's a good point. One thing that I often will hear folks say is, because the word abuse it's a heavy loaded term, whether
It
that's
is.
fair or accurate or not, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
connotations that come with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there are a lot of folks that are like, well, yeah, maybe have some stuff that needs resolved from my time in the church. I don't know if I would say it's abuse. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fair, because saying adverse religious experience, I mean, like you said, you're not needing to qualify like, well,
Yeah.
was it abuse? What actually happened? What were the dynamics? Like, no, the point is it caused harm to you.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
thing with abuse, and this is another conversation I do have with folks, is the conversation around intentions versus impact
Mm,
from folks
yeah.
like in the church, because they'll say, well, they
Yeah.
had good intentions, like my parents, or even the
Mm-hmm.
pastor, they I know they had good intentions, and maybe they did.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'll even tell people, especially because I do a lot of parts work, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
believe parts are bad, and by extension,
Yes.
I don't really believe people are bad. I think people are
Mm-hmm.
scared and are just
Mm-hmm.
traumatized and are doing what they do to try to stay
Mm-hmm.
safe and all of that, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'll even say, let's just assume their intentions are good in that case. So we don't need to waste bandwidth thinking about that. The point is, though, this caused
Mm-hmm.
harm to you.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yes.
was an adverse experience, and in the context of religion, so therefore adverse religious experience. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't have to try to decide or rationalize whether someone had good intentions or bad intentions, because abuse
Mm-hmm.
does imply bad intentions. It implies that
Sure.
there was a certain level of intention behind an act. At least in
Yeah.
my mind, it does.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I did all of that to just say I agree with you. I think I absolutely
Mm-hmm.
saying that does. I find that term does feel a lot more useful, I think,
Yeah.
and more accessible.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. Like, I know one of the things that I've grappled with, and other people, especially people that were in more of like that leadership position in religious context, whether that was like a formal like clergy member, or maybe, quote unquote, just a leader of something or something like that. I mean, I worked in a paid position at a church. I had a level of influence, and driving like the the mission of the church and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that there's many things that I look back on now, and I thought at the time, this is the right thing to do. This is the most godly thing to do. This is like, even if somebody can't see it, this is in their best interest because it's going to lead them closer to God. And I was doing it like, my intent was good. I really thought that this was the most godly way, or the most spiritual way, or was going to allow for the most sanctification or transformation, whatever it was. And now, years out of it, I'm like, oh gosh, like that was really harmful teaching or really harmful practices. And I've worked on not shaming myself for that, because I was doing what was done to me. I was taught what I was teaching to others, but I still have a level of responsibility that I need to take as an adult, to say I made choices and they harmed people. Impact and intention. I think that's a good way to put it. But like,
Mm-hmm.
I just, yeah, I don't even know what my question is, other than I'm just curious to hear, like, if that's something you've dealt with, of people who are grappling through like, this thing was done to me, it harmed me, but also I did that to other people. And almost like being able to offer, yeah, personal experience of going like, these adverse religious experiences, again, like, may have been coming from a good place, but the impact of them was deeply harmful.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had thoughts, and like in my own life, like how, because the
Yeah.
thing is, yeah, I used to be a part of that system.
Hmm.
Um, and so not only have I experienced adverse religious experiences, I've probably helped to impose them onto other folks at times
Yeah.
in my life,
Mhm.
and that's definitely something that just to normalize that experience, that's very common, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like you said, not shaming yourself. I mean, I understand why that part is there, because as we start to realize the immense amount of
Mm.
harm that these systems are capable of causing people, we do
Yeah.
kind of like shrink back into horror, like, oh my gosh, like this is so just
Yeah.
this is so destructive, and it's so insidious how it just creeps
Mm.
into like every little corner of life. And then there's that reckoning of, oh shit, and I was
Mm.
also complicit in it and
Yeah.
actively driving that machine as well,
Hmm. Hmm.
um I really just think that that's part of, I think
Yeah.
that's just part of being human, and it's when you
Yeah.
start to learn better, you hopefully start to do better as it's safe to
Yeah.
do so. I'll say that too.
Yeah.
That's the other piece,
Yeah.
like depending on who you are, where you were at, like
Mhm.
it maybe is not safe
Mhm.
to alter course the minute
Yeah.
you start to have doubts about, is this something that I still want to be involved in, meeting like the church.
Mhm.
Like I'll
Mhm.
give a concrete example. Like I definitely have gotten this question so many times, where somebody is still like on paid staff at a church, maybe even a pastor. And they're like, I
Yeah.
don't know if I believe any of this stuff anymore. If I were to be honest with the church board about what I believe right now in regards to
Yeah.
deconstruction and God and all of that, I would lose my
Mm.
job. Like I would lose
Yeah.
my job tomorrow if I were to tell them the
Yes.
truth. So they're like, I feel like I'm
Mm.
being dishonest.
Yeah.
And I also have kids and a partner, and we
Yes.
can't
Bills
afford
to
to be
pay.
homeless,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. Mm.
yeah, I understand the positions that folks are in, and so I don't
Mhm.
judge anybody for,
Yeah.
do it. You have to do to be safe too.
Surviving.
That's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that speaks to just the dynamic of what these systems are. You mentioned the
Yeah.
term earlier of like power and control. Like these are systems that are set up to have power over, to control other people, their behaviors, their lives, so much so that when you have doubts or questions, your very existence and survival is being threatened. In some cases, like you just said, for the pastor who's questioning, if they were to be honest about that, their paycheck goes away. How are they going to provide for their family? How are they going to live and exist in the world where they're not educated to do anything else? They're not, like, I think those dynamics of power and control are so interwoven into lifestyle and result in adverse religious experiences. I think we have to like name that. And with that said, like with power and control, what are your thoughts on that? If you were, if you're having clients or you're talking about that, how do you describe that to people as it pertains to things like, high control religion, adverse religious experiences?
Like, how would I describe it in terms of like the harm that's caused and that all of that?
Yeah. Well, sure. Or yeah, like what are dynamics of power and control first? Maybe that's where
Yeah.
we should
Yeah.
start. I believe that dynamics of power and control are like the foundation of abuse.
Mhm.
That abuse is built, like an abuse meaning like behaviors, practices, things that
Mhm.
that happen to us or that we're doing to other people. So I would put adverse religious experiences under that as well. And like underneath that is this dynamic of power and control. And we see it in high control religion, we see it in cults, we see it in fundamentalism. And so if we were to just explore like what is power and control, like what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Especially in the
Yeah.
context of a religion, how would you
Yeah.
describe it?
I mean, in the most broad sense, it's just anything that's taking away your ability to have your own, I think, bodily autonomy and consent.
Sure.
And so, of course, that
Yeah.
that could obviously go beyond religion,
Oh, yeah.
to all
Yeah.
sorts of things.
Hmm.
But in the context of religion, yeah, I mean, anything, any position, any context where you do not, in fact, have the autonomy or the ability to
Hmm.
say no and still be okay, still be safe, still be accepted. Like, I'm not saying
Yeah.
that you are like physically in danger if you say no. I mean,
Mm.
maybe, I hope not, but like, would you still be in good social standing if you did
Yeah.
not do XYZ?
Hmm.
And if the answer is no, okay, well, there's a power dynamic right there. Like,
Hmm.
you are
Hmm.
being coerced to do something
Yeah.
to stay
Yeah.
safe, to belong, to like that whole social thing,
Mm.
like that lone monkey is a dead monkey. Like, we are
Yes.
hardwired to do what we need to do to stay safe within the social group. And in
Yeah.
this case, those groups that we're talking about are religious,
Hmm.
religious groups. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think that's how I would describe
Mm.
it in the most broad
Yeah.
sense, just a loss of
Yeah.
autonomy, the ability to actually
Yeah.
have a say and still be
Hmm.
safe.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of describing it for sure. Because, like in some ways, power dynamics are unavoidable. You think about like parent child,
Hmm.
right? You think about boss employee. And of course, like that's not like assuming then every dynamic where there's, one person that has more power is automatically abusive. I just think it has the possibility to be that, but it doesn't mean that it will be. But
Hmm.
but yeah, that idea of like one person or group of people having so much power over somebody where they can control everything of how do I think, how do I act, how do I interact, how do I dress, what is my sex, what's okay, like in regard to my gender and sexuality, how do I spend my finances, like those those create this dynamic in which, yeah, not only is that person in a position of power, but then if you don't follow that, consequences happen, whether
Hmm.
that's disconnection or punishment inside the group, or ultimately eternal conscious torment. That idea of hell, right? So, well, maybe things will turn out okay on this earth for you to go against me, but also when Jesus
Hmm.
comes back, you're going to hell, and that's terrifying.
Yeah.
And so I think that fear of the consequence in the gravity of the consequence
Yes.
definitely plays into those dynamics for sure. And I
Yeah.
think too, maybe this is just like a little personal anecdote. When I started recognizing like religious power and control. It was while I was getting out of a domestically violent relationship. And I remember looking through my journals and I couldn't differentiate between like what my abusive partner had done to me, told me, and what the church had done to me, told me. So like when he would say, "You're so stupid, you don't deserve X, Y, or Z," that was not difficult for me to believe because I had already been told that for so many years of my life. I'm unworthy. I don't deserve the air that I breathe, right? Like there's nothing good about me. So it's not a stretch to believe that when a human says that to me because duh, like that's what God thinks about me. But I think what's so interesting when we talk about dynamics of power and control, the way that that's developed is not very overt. It's very covert, right?
Mhm.
And I always use this example of like, if you were to go on a date with somebody and first date and you're sitting down at dinner and they get super mad and they flip the table over and they cuss the server out and they punch a hole in the wall, like you're probably not going to go on a second date with them. Um, and and if that's how abuse and dynamics of power and control worked, like in this really overt way, we would be able to spot it so quickly. Like we probably wouldn't have many abusive relationships because we'd be like, oh gosh, no, like that. I'm not interested in a person who's like that. But dynamics of power and control are so subtle and they're over time and they slowly like grade away at your autonomy,
Mhm.
at your individuality. And so when we look at kind of some of the features of like power and control in religion or in relationships, we're talking about these little tiny behaviors that are happening over time, minimizing, denying, blaming, well, it's like, well, gosh, I've done that before. I don't consider myself an abusive person, but I've definitely minimized my behavior
Yeah.
before. I've blamed others. And so we go, oh, well, I've done that. This person is doing that. I mean, I can't fault them because right, I've done that. Or we look at other things like with gender roles or intimidation, accusation, using things against each other, name calling, all of these things that like just by themselves may not be considered abusive, but when we stack them on top of each other and we
Mhm.
in their increase over time, all of a sudden we start to notice, wow, like that person or that group has more and more control over my life. And so it's everything in religion, from the way you spend your finances to whom you can be in a romantic relationship with, to what you can wear and how to raise your children. And they say it as in like, well, this is the godly way, or this is the most
Mhm.
accurate way according to our holy text, or this is what the pastor or the clergy says. And so you're like, well, okay, who am I to argue with God, first of all? But also, the way I've been parenting hasn't been working. And so, okay, I'll take their advice. And maybe I don't agree with all of it, but there's no perfect parent. And so we can like minimize kind of the behavior that's happening. And then all of a sudden we look back and we're like, oh, wow, you have taken control over all these areas of my life. And I'm at this point where I'm not even sure who I am, if
Mhm.
me exists anymore. And I think that's kind of the mind F about dynamics of power and control, because it's not overt. It's not the person flipping over the table.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
over time, as that happens, more and more extreme behavior can happen, and we don't notice it as such.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. There are so many parallels that I've seen with like power structures, and then just within the church context that mirrors or parallels
Yeah,
narcissistic abuse, like textbook
totally.
narcissistic
Yeah.
abuse. So it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, honestly, there's it's not overt and it's not obvious at first. There probably was plenty of, like, I don't know, love bombing, for example. You're right. And
Right. Right.
and then it's little subtle things that come in as it goes along.
Mhm.
Another very common tactic that, again, I think this is pulled mostly from a lot from the context of narcissistic abuse, but churches do it, and that's you're familiar with the DARVO acronym?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
I figured you were, but
Yes.
so those who don't know, it's DARVO, and so the D is deny, A is attack, and then RVO is reverse victim offender. So the script is flipped, roles are
Yeah.
reversed. So for an example, like, say a pastor does something harmful or a church member and it's
Yeah.
brought up and denied, like, well, I didn't do that, or that's not what happened, you're remembering it wrongly.
You're making too big
Attacking,
of a deal out of
yes,
this.
yes.
Yeah.
And then the attack is you, in fact, are the one causing harm. You're like harming me. Like, why are
Mm-hmm.
or to use Christianese, you're creating this spirit of, like, I don't know, of
Yes.
conflict or
Division. Yeah. Yeah.
bitterness or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And then RVO, the reverse victim offenders, like, so see, actually, I'm the one who's being harmed here. Like, I just,
Mm.
you really should have maybe taken, kept this to yourself and just had a spirit of prayer with the Lord and prayed about it and
Yes.
fasted. And,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe we wouldn't be having this conflict right now, but you had to, like,
Yeah.
rock the boat and create a conflict where there didn't need to be
Mm-hmm.
one. And it's like, holy
Mm-hmm.
shit, what just happened? Very disorienting.
Yeah. Especially because I think this is the unique piece about like spiritual abuse and religious abuse is that in all of that is God, right?
Yes.
Like it's God's way, it's God's will, this is God's plan. And so whether we're talking about like the DARVO acronym or different behaviors or things like that, the violation is not just against the person, it's against God.
Mhm.
And or like if I'm offending you, like if I'm the perpetrator of this abuse, I also get to claim, well, this is God's way, or this is what the Bible says, or this is what, whatever. And
Yeah.
well, who are we to like question God, argue with God, like this is God's
Right.
mouthpiece and my clergy
Right.
member, like, right. So there's even this other layer of control, not only on the human level, but then we've got God who's like approving all of it.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that
Yeah.
reminds me. Like, I just anecdotally, I remember a family who they were going to pull their kids out of, like, private Christian academy because it's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest, it's
Yeah.
expensive. And we're
Yeah.
going to go to do public school instead. And I still remember, like, just the whole response of the church was, oh, how did they say it? Something to the effect of, like, it's heartbreaking to see you turn your back on God.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's like, it's
Wow.
literally a financial decision. They're in a good school district, so even the public
Yeah.
school is still going to be great. And yet that's how it's worded. It's like you're
Yeah.
turning your back on God. I don't know that they ever came back. I don't blame them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have
Yeah.
either. But
Absolutely. Yeah. Which like feels very fundamentalist, right? Like, here's how
yeah.
you do things. Here's, how do you see that like playing, like going side or like playing in hand, like dynamics of power and control with fundamentalism or how do you,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think so. Because even just because oftentimes what we were just talking about within, like, these circles, like, one thing I see a lot is there's this imposed conformity, which again is that loss of autonomy, which is
Mm-hmm.
we kind of established earlier, is like not having autonomy is often what can set the stage for these things to happen, in
Mm-hmm.
these power dynamics. And so, yeah, I definitely see that within fundamentalism. And so with that said, like, yeah, I mean, fundamentalism, I think, is an ideology of just psychological inflexibility. It's very, or
Yes.
black and white
Yeah.
thinking, or binary thinking, or all or nothing
Mm-hmm.
thinking. There's several
Yeah.
terms that kind of mean the same function. You can use them interchangeably, I
Mm-hmm.
suppose, but yeah, it's just that rigidity of thought that, there is a right way to do things. This is it. Or maybe I don't know what it is, but I need to find out what it is because there is an absolute and I need to find it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we definitely see that showing up in places other than just Christian fundamentalism.
Of course. Yeah. 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 I mean, that's cults that can
Yeah.
be narcissistic abuse. Like there is that rigidity or cognitive inflexibility
Mhm.
of just, yeah, it's like this pattern of thinking and relating of very binary. It is this way
Mhm.
or that way. There's no middle ground, right? And I think that plays into dynamics of power and control when you go, okay, so on this one side, we have what's good or right or healthy or God honoring or whatever. And so then anything outside of that is bad, wrong, evil, sinful, dangerous, whatever we want to put on that. And so then we can, like, the dynamic of power control can really be created around what's on like the good side of the column, right? So you have to think and act and do and relate in all these quote unquote good ways that are very binary, very rigid, very much inflexible. There's no kind of room for curiosity or, trying things out or anything like that. And so then we create dynamics of control around that. And that goes to every area of life. It's not just in how we think. It's that, oh, this person from this group of people who doesn't believe the exact same things or doesn't dress in the same way or doesn't act in the same way then is bad. And we can ostracize them. We can treat them however we want. We can ignore them. We can pretend they don't exist in so many ways, or seek to eradicate them in many ways. And so, yeah, I see that huge crossover between like fundamentalist thinking quickly moving into dynamics of power and control that then can create abusive behaviors or adverse religious experiences.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so much. It's so, there's like,
Yeah.
just how pervasive it is, and one thing that I was wondering, and I think that's important to note too, we were talking about adverse religious experiences, and and we've talked about religious trauma. So okay, I'll put you on the spot and ask, but
Okay.
I know you have thoughts on this, so it's like, don't worry. Adverse religious experiences, if you have those, does that always result in trauma?
Such a good question. No. if you want the short answer, no. No. So when we created or came up with the term adverse religious experiences, we came up with it in hopes that it could be something that is researched. And we do have a working hypothesis, and that is the more adverse religious experiences you have, the greater the likelihood is that it will result in trauma. And that's our kind of working hypothesis, but it is in the stages of being researched. We have a collaborative research group that is like focusing on that question and others around it. But I think it's important to note that you could have one adverse religious experience and it results in trauma, and you could have 100 adverse religious experiences and it doesn't result in trauma. So I'm going to go back to that definition that we talked about at the beginning. We talked about it a couple episodes ago. Trauma is not the thing that happens to us, but the way our nervous system responds to the thing. And so the adverse religious experience then is the thing that happens to us. Now, it resulting in trauma is a possibility, but there's also a possibility that it might result in other things too, whether that's other mental health diagnoses, other physiological disorders or illnesses, social phobias, relational issues, things like that. Trauma is not the only thing that quote unquote happens to people coming out of religious context. There could be a variety of other things that they struggle with as a result of the things that they learned or they did or were done to them in the context of religion. So I would say that probably the more adverse religious experiences you have, it is maybe much likelier that it would result in religious trauma, but that's not exclusive. There's a possibility that it has no impact or that there's a different impact. So yeah. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, then that makes sense. It's like I see the commonality here between that, like the I forgot the name of the research that was done, but the like adverse childhood experiences, that work that was done on trauma. The idea
Vincent Folletti. Yeah.
You're right. And the more that you have, like there's a higher statistical likelihood that you will have other negative health outcomes and trauma and whatnot, but that doesn't mean that but it's kind of like the difference between like correlation and causation. Like there is a positive correlation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just because you have this adverse experience that you're going to be exhibiting trauma later in life or immediately.
Yeah. I think, and one thing too, if we're going to put on like our research hats and, whatever, I really love the ACE study, which is the adverse childhood experiences study. It is what is, the research was pioneering, groundbreaking, and has done a lot of good for the mental health community in understanding what trauma is. I do see it as pretty incomplete. The adverse childhood experiences study says, hey, there's these 10 things that, the higher your score. So if you had 6 of these things, it's the likelihood of it resulting in trauma is higher. But I think that's a bit reductionistic to say it's just these 10 things, or that you have to have a high ACE score in order for it to qualify as trauma or potentially deal with it. So we really wanted to leave that open to say it could be that you have one adverse religious experience and that results in trauma, or you could have 100 and it doesn't. And to just not have to be so prescriptive. Again, moving
Mhm.
away from that fundamentalist way of thinking of like, here's what it must be, in order to have this result. And so it's been helpful to have that as a framework, but we're hoping to expand beyond that, because I think that it's just really important for people to recognize, and this is echoing what you said before, like if you had an adverse religious experience, it was adverse for you, even if it wasn't for other people. And that is so
Mhm.
important. That's actually like the opposite of fundamentalism, to say, this was my experience and it impacted me in a very particular way. And it may not have impacted my sibling or my partner or my friend in that same way, but it did impact me. And so I can seek the support and the help that I need as a result. That feels really important in this process of healing from adverse religious experiences and spiritual and religious abuse.
Yeah. We were talking about the loss of autonomy,
Mm,
that being a piece that really plays into a lot of this too, not being able to have autonomy. One thing I noticed
yeah.
that happens a lot in these high control systems is that the locus of control is taken outside of yourself. You are told you cannot trust yourself. There is an authority that is outside yourself. And so much of healing, it seems like, is this return to the importance of your own lived experience, the
Mm,
importance of
yeah.
that. And that is actually something that can be trusted. And it's okay if it's
Yeah.
only you, because I'm just
Hmm.
thinking how in fundamentalism, like that imposed conformity or even uniformity, how
Mm,
there's this prescribed way of what something should look like, what you should be doing, how you should be showing up, and how we
yeah.
can take that very same thing into, like, as we leave out the door, we recognize something happened and we want to heal, and we're doing the same thing though. We're like checking boxes and it's like, okay, well, this is how I should be feeling, what this is how I should be healing, this is.
Yes.
And the thing is, like, maybe not, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
you. It's like, it's your life. You get
Hmm.
to decide if something hurt you or not. Um,
Hmm.
you just, there is no what you should or shouldn't be feeling. Like, it is what it
Hmm.
is, and that's
Hmm.
valid.
Yeah.
But that's not something that fundamentalism of any kind, whether it's Christian
Right.
fundamentalism or something else, like, that's
Hmm.
not usually something that fundamentalism gives flexibility to allow to exist. That lived experience that
Mm-mm.
may not fall in line with what the majority has experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important. I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but when you think about things like adverse religious experiences and or spiritual abuse, is that something you would say that you have had to navigate through in your own life, both in terms of like something happening as well as like the part of your process of healing?
It's interesting. I definitely can see how it has shown up in my life, and usually
Mm,
the way I describe it, I come out of Seventh Day Adventism, and so a lot of folks assume,
yeah.
like, oh, what was that like coming? And honestly, it's one of those things where I'll say Adventism. So the high control religion I come from, I don't know that I would say it directly did anything particularly harmful to me, not directly to
Mm,
me, but the way that it enabled a lot of
mm,
systems or cycles of abuse through in my family generationally.
mm,
I can say that it definitely enabled and was complicit. And was it not for this fundamentalist framework that generations of my family existed in,
mm.
yeah, things probably could have been different.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I definitely can see how I could consider it like an adverse religious experience, but it,
Hmm.
it wasn't so much the religion directly, but so much as the way it was enabling things. So, for example,
Mm,
like the idea of the emphasis on forgiveness, which sounds great,
mm.
but when that turns into turning a blind eye to pretty blatant abuse, and putting things,
Yeah.
sweeping things under the rug, erring on the side of forgiveness, so that abuse is then in fact happens again in a different
Mm.
generation by the same perpetrator, things like that,
Yeah.
and so because you just you forgive, that's what you do, you're a Christian, you
Yes.
forgive, and so, and that's just one example, so
Yeah.
it's like, was that overtly Adventism or even Christianity? I mean, yes and no, but
Mm,
definitely the way that it enabled other things that were
mm.
already at play, I can definitely see that as being the harm that was caused.
Yeah, I think that's really important, like that you're offering that example, because it speaks to like the broad nature of adverse religious experiences, right?
Mhm.
Of you're going, hey, there wasn't this like specific thing, but because of the doctrines and the teaching, I see the generational harm. Whereas other people might say
Mhm.
there was this specific thing or multiple
Yeah.
specific things that that are adverse religious experiences for me. I love that you broadened that definition.
Yeah. And I could probably think of some more, but I think that's the good one. That's
Yeah.
the big one that comes to mind when you ask that question.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that.
I'm curious about you though. What yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll go more on the specific side then. I can think of many that I've experienced, but I think, some of the most overt, or the most overt experience that I have to be careful because I don't want to like ramble on for hours and hours, but, I've mentioned before that I worked in formal ministry. I worked at a church. And I remember the first experience of spiritual abuse, though I did not have those words for it. I was working so I worked with the middle school youth group and was the ministry assistant, and then there was one for the high school youth group. We shared an office and we were working on a project together, and had a division of tasks, and this other person did her things, I did my things. And I remember one day one of the youth pastors coming into the office and started yelling at me, and I was really confused because I had no idea what he was talking about, and finally was able to kind of figure out that he was yelling at me because this task that his assistant was supposed to do had not gotten done, which impacted some other things. And he mistakenly, though he never admitted it was a mistake, thought it was my task and started yelling at me. And when I tried to defend myself and just simply say, I think this is wrong, like this wasn't my task, started screaming at me, calling me a liar, telling me that I was usurping his authority, that I was not being submissive. He was so loud that one of the other ministry assistants from another department came and like closed the door to our office suite so that, nobody else really had to be privy to this. That person wasn't concerned with what was being said to me or done to me. They just wanted to make sure that nobody else was like, listening in. And I was devastated because I was being accused of all these things that I had not done. And I was destroyed. And before, like, he was getting more and more angry. And mind you, his assistant was witnessing all of this and knew like that she was the one who had dropped the ball. And because he wasn't getting anywhere with me, and I wasn't admitting to this thing that I hadn't done, he finally looked at me and he said, you are, basically disrespecting your spiritual authority, and you will not say a word about this to anybody. And if you do, like, that's even worse, because that means that you're disobeying your spiritual authority. And I was just absolutely devastated, because in my body, even though I was supposed to be like divorced from my body, I was like, oh God, this is not right. And I could tell. I lived close to the church at that point. And so I just took my lunch break and I went home and I was sobbing, and I reached out to a family member to try to get some clarity and maybe some direction. So I was already violating what he told me, that I wasn't allowed to tell anybody else. And I just said, here's the situation. I explained it. And they said, you know what, he is your spiritual authority. You just need to admit to it and try to make things right. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, I can't do that. Like, that's so inauthentic, and it's a lie. Like, I actually would be sinning by doing that, because I would be lying. And so I went back to the office, and I decided to talk to my boss, who conveniently was not there when all of this was happening. And I shared everything with him, and he looked at me and he said the same thing. It's your job to make things right. He is your spiritual authority. And I understood in that moment that if I did not do that, I would likely lose my job, which meant I would lose my community, which meant I would be, discarded, that I would have like a penance to pay, essentially, that there was a possibility for accusations and rumors, to be viewed as a dangerous, sinful person. And I understood in that moment, I couldn't do that because I didn't have the resources to survive outside of that system. And so I marched myself into the youth pastor's office, and I took full responsibility for something I did not do and tried to make things right. And it's something that has always stuck with me, because on the one hand, I'm really proud of myself for knowing that it wasn't right, but I'm also so sad that I had to experience that, and that there was really nothing I could do, that everything that was important to me was on the line, and I
Mhm.
had to admit to something that wasn't true, but that was the only way I was going to survive in that situation.
Wow. Well, that is, I mean, I am so
Yeah.
sorry. First of all,
Thanks. Yeah.
that's
Hmm.
a lot. And I think that, and what I said about safety earlier, I just think that, plays into that illustrates it perfectly. I mean, on the
Hmm.
one hand, it's like, part of you may wish, like, I wish I had done something differently, but also the way I see it too
Yeah.
is just the whole lens of compassion. You were staying
Yes.
safe. You were doing
Yeah.
exactly what your body was doing what it needed to stay safe. And yeah, it sucked, but
Hmm.
that was the
Hmm.
system that you were in. Like you
Yeah.
weren't. I said this the other day to somebody. It's like you weren't broken. The system was, and you were just staying safe.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective, because I think there is the temptation for all of us to go back and shame ourselves for how we
Yeah.
responded in those situations. And when we can look at it through the lens of compassion and even the lens of the nervous system and
Hmm.
say, gosh, how brilliant was it that my body knew I got to accept this. I have to just, kind of take it in the chin, and so that I can survive. And offer my younger self compassion when that happens. I think it's brilliant. I think that it's brilliant that somehow we knew how to do that. And I'm more inclined to lean into that compassion nowadays than I am the shame or confusion of like, why didn't you just walk away? Well, you know what? I couldn't. And so I was doing the best I could to survive in that situation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I do really, I genuinely think that is some of
Mm,
the most important things that we can offer ourselves in the whole
yeah.
process of healing
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
is the self-compassion and the patience. I
Yeah.
mean, when you really start to understand, you were doing the best that you could with what you
Hmm.
had, and the environment
Hmm.
was, it was fucked up, for not the clinical term, but it's accurate. So
Probably should be the clinical term. Um,
yeah.
yeah. With like the clinical piece though, I'm curious. I know what my answer to this question is. We'll see if yours
Mhm.
is the same. It doesn't have to be the same. When you think about the work that you do with clients and like around adverse religious experiences and spiritual abuse, do you see some common themes coming up in regard to like, oh, it's, most of my clients, it's like they would say this was like really harmful, like kind of across the board. Um, this seems to be a thing that pops up over and over. Anything like that?
Yeah, there definitely are lots of common themes. I'm just trying to think what are the most common ones that I see.
Mm,
Honestly, this maybe is not even the one that you're expecting, but the one that I hear the most, that I don't know that it matters what your background is. I think I've heard this from pretty much everyone, and that is
hmm.
the hardest thing about all of it was a loss of community.
Interesting.
And then
Yeah.
the lead up to that, like, so it's one thing once
Mm,
you're gone, looking back and saying, oh yeah, I can really feel the loss now. But even just sort of
hmm.
the threats and the coercion of losing that, kind of the build up, like, so yeah, there's other things, like,
Yeah.
yes, a threat of eternal hell, that's a harmful idea there, and there's
Yeah.
plenty of others, but I think loss of community and feeling that
Mm,
loss is one
mm,
of the heaviest things. That I don't know that it matters where you come from. That's something that I think
mhm,
everyone I've worked with has mentioned at some point.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, personally, yes, absolutely. It's devastating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, like when I kind of span out and I go, gosh, what are some of the most common things that come up? It's really like the impact of purity culture. And
Hmm.
again, that's not
Yep.
just like evangelicalism. There is purity culture in every, and not even just around sexuality either, like purity cultures, right? Of this idea of it's very fundamentalist in the ways that you act and relate and things like that. But I think, yeah, across the board, some of the longest lasting adverse religious experiences that I've personally experienced or talked about with clients definitely is around purity culture, and the
Hmm.
way that that just kind of sinks into so many areas of
Yeah,
life way, way, way after
it
having
does.
left or cognitively rejecting those beliefs.
Yes, I have so many opinions about that too. That's another one. And the way it
Yeah.
ties into the nervous system, which I know we talked about
Yeah.
a previous
Hmm.
episode, like with
Hmm.
purity culture and just human sexuality. And it's like,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
I won't go
We'll
off on a
ha-
tangent, but I see that one a
we'll
lot as
have to
well.
do some episodes around purity culture and the unique impact of that and
Yes.
trauma and all those things for sure. So as we kind of wrap things up, for today, I'm obviously we both work with clients. We both are very versed in, working with people who have experienced spiritual and religious abuse and adverse religious experiences. What do people do with that? Like, what are some of the supports? What are the resources? Like, obviously coaching, therapy, like that, those are, if you can, if that's something that's of interest to you or you have the resources for that, I always highly suggest it. But what else would you say?
I feel like I say this a lot, but I mean, oh my gosh, it's so pertinent. And again, that is the being patient and kind with yourself.
Mm,
That the other thing, like a more concrete thing that I often, because one thing I hear a lot of folks say is this feeling like the loss of community, but also just like the loss of identity. Like, who am I now? What
yeah.
is like, what even is life anymore?
Mm,
Like that's really a common one when you're still kind of, you're out, but you're freshly out maybe. And I think the patience and compassion is big, but just allowing yourself space to just do things you enjoy, rest.
mm,
Maybe you don't know what you enjoy, try things.
mhm,
Or
mhm.
and just again, I come back to just the patience piece, because there's also, like, for example, this is anecdotal for myself, but like when I was really kind of like, I had kind of like been going through a few pretty tough years doing therapy and all the stuff, right?
Mhm.
And I'd kind of like felt like I'd really kind of crested a hill. I feel like,
Mm,
okay, I've really gotten somewhere now. And I felt like, awesome, things are going to get better now. Momentum's going to pick up. I'm going to get my life back. And honestly, like that entire next year, I remember like just feeling exhausted.
mm.
I didn't really do
Yeah.
anything. I mean, I did, I lived life, I
Yeah.
survived, I was okay. But like, I just remember thinking like, man, I sure took a lot of naps that year. And I just
I
want to
love it.
normalize that too. It's like,
Yeah.
as you're doing nervous system work, learning to feel safe again, or maybe for the
Mm.
first time ever, like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that takes, it has taken a lot out of you. And so
Hmm.
even if you just need to just focus on resting and not actually doing so much, like that's
Mm.
okay too.
Yeah.
It's because, yeah, I think therapy is great. I also recognize that being the go-to response for every issue is just not financially realistic. And so like
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
anyway, I feel like I'm kind of all over the place with that. But again, just be patient with yourself, be kind with yourself, allow
Hmm.
yourself to rest, allow yourself to do
Hmm.
things just because you want to do them. Remember the loss of autonomy.
Mm.
That was a huge function
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
fundamentalism. Like doing things because you want to really is pretty
Hmm.
damn cathartic and important.
Hmm. I agree with that very much. Yeah. I would only add, as you were talking, I was like, "Oh, what would I say? Right. If I have a client who's like, oh my gosh, I have all these adverse, experiences. Um, I've said this before. Pointing out abuse is not the same as healing abuse. And I really believe it's important to understand
Mhm.
that. And I also think it's important to be honest about the things that happen to us, because I think that's part of the first way that we actually do heal, is by allowing ourselves the space and permission to be accurate and honest about the things that have happened to us. Because truthfully, like if different things had happened, we would have different things to say, right? And so to be accurate and honest about the things that have happened, maybe even including our own parts in that when that's necessary, truth offers freedom, right? It's a really nice starting point. And that's not to suggest that there's, it's always easy to navigate this, but I think giving yourself space and permission to say this is what happened, or it really was this bad, or
Mhm.
I shouldn't have had to experience that was not ideal, and being honest is so important. I use a definition of denial when I'm working with clients, and it's a paraphrased definition or summarized. And so denial is a defense mechanism that we use to keep us from seeing things as they truly are. Because if we did see things for how they truly are, it would feel consciously intolerable. And so we use denial for good reason, right? We go,
Yeah.
nope, I kind of got to put these blinders on because to see it for how it truly is would be too much. That's what I did in that story that I shared about that instance of spiritual abuse. To actually see it for what it was going to be too much.
Yeah.
And so I had to live with a level of denial. And so I just want to like name that as a very effective coping mechanism. And we all use it as humans. It's not exclusive to religious trauma, but certainly a part of it. And so when we can then get ourselves into spaces that feel safer, where we're not in crisis and threat, we can then face the things that we've been denying, that we've had to deny for our own safety and protection. We can start to look at them through new eyes. And that's where that accuracy and honesty comes in play. And I think we can't underestimate how powerful that is. So yeah, that's what I would maybe, I know those aren't concrete steps necessarily that we're offering, and yet maybe that's okay.
Honestly, I think that's okay. I think that oftentimes, I mean, we're talking about like fundamentalism and like these prescribed ways of doing things.
Yeah.
I just can't. I know it's not what folks often want to hear, but there's not a prescribed, guaranteed way to get out of it and be okay.
Yeah.
I do believe you can and will be okay, but I can't tell you what that's going to look like for you. And
It's so individual.
I think that's part of it. I really think that's part of it. So
Yeah.
all of that to say, I think it's okay that we don't have like concrete steps.
Yes, I agree. This has been such a lovely conversation. I know there's probably, a million more we could have about adverse religious experiences and religious abuse, but I love that we're able to have this and dive deeper into, what this is, because the people who are listening to this podcast probably really identify with this. It's nice to have words to explain the things that are happening and to just open this up. The things that we can talk about freely, they start to loosen their grip and their power over us. And so I think these are conversations that are really, really powerful and really necessary. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great.
Yeah. All right. So we are taking back Sundays. And Andrew, I am curious to know for you, what are you reclaiming?
Yeah, so this isn't something I just started reclaiming. It's been a work in progress, but it's something that I'm talking about more now. And that is writing. So anyone who knows me, like I probably talked about this here and there. Like I've loved writing pretty much my entire life. Since I was a little kid, like I would write short stories and stuff about, I don't even know, knights and castles and other things that were inspired by like Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia, things like that, growing up though, as I got older, like I still liked writing. I always liked it. I actually, when I was very much in the Adventist church, I even wrote like half a dozen articles that were published like in the Adventist flagship journal, the Adventist Review. I was even paid for those.
Wow.
So to my writing self, like, yeah, that was a big deal. And I also just remember how I was so encouraged to, what's the word, like commit my writing to the Lord or that whole idea, that whole notion. And so, like, oh yeah, you can write, but just, needs to be like sanctified and do it for Jesus and all of that type of thing. And so that's what I did. And it's interesting how even after leaving that, so yeah, I'm not writing Adventist stuff anymore, of course. But then I found myself always writing self-help psychology stuff, kind of the same function though, like this thing of like, I need to be helping others. I need to be doing this thing. Like in other words, there's got to be some purpose beyond just myself because I enjoy writing this. Like there needs to be something else. And it was very unconscious. Like I wasn't really explicitly aware of that, but in hindsight, it's pretty obvious. I'm like, oh yeah, I was doing that. Anyway, so what I'm reclaiming now is I'm actually working on it's actually a novel that I'm working on. I don't know if and when anyone else is ever going to see it, but yeah, if I finish it, I'm actually going to try to publish it. And it has nothing to do with anything psychology, self-help, or religion. It's a subgenre that I'm interested in. It's like Southern Gothic psychological thriller.
Yeah. So. I love that. That's incredible and very inspirational. Yeah.
Well, thank
you.
Because
I'm similar to you. Like I love writing and so much it is, help related.
Right, right.
Yeah. Oh, that is so great. Well, if you ever do publish, I will be the first in line to read it and promote it for you.
Well, thank you. What about you though?
All right.
What are some things that you are
Yeah.
reclaiming?
I know I'm going back and forth between two different things.
Mm,
But the one that popped in my mind first, and this is going to sound general, and then I'll explain it. Is really like I actually what I'll say is I'm reclaiming a slower pace, but I don't actually know if I'm reclaiming it or just doing it for the first time. By the way, if you're watching the YouTube, you can see my little dog here. So she's making an appearance and say hi, baby. No, she does not want to be in camera. Um, Anyways, I'm reclaiming a slower pace. And I know I mentioned a couple episodes ago that just a few months ago went through surgery. I had a hysterectomy, and it was a really interesting time of recovery because I was not able to do anything. I didn't watch TV. I didn't listen to music. I couldn't stand the Bachelor podcast that I normally listen to. I just literally laid there. And it struck me how fast paced my life has been, and how that does not feel unsustainable. And so I am reclaiming a slower pace. So we could call that self-care, I guess. But I'm reclaiming a slower pace that prioritizes things like basic needs for me, eating, moving my body, being with safe and fun connections, which feels very much the opposite of fundamentalism, where my life was so fast paced, and there wasn't ever room for rest, and any rest that was taken needed to be spent reading my Bible or engaging in spiritual practices. And I've really felt for the last few months like what needs to be prioritized for me is like time with the trees, and walking in nature, and being with my dog, and surrounding myself with people that are safe and fun and have a great connection. And so I feel like that's what I am reclaiming. And it's interesting because having like saying that is one thing, and then actually making it a priority in my schedule is another thing. And so, like as an example, my task list of things that I need to get done is long. But I'm going to leave this podcast recording, and I'm going to go to the Greenway, and I'm going to walk, because I know that if I want a shot at getting those other things done, I have to be centered. And today the trees are going to center me. And so, yeah, it's this like making little choices that are different, that are prioritizing a slower pace or self-care. And I'm trying to be consistent with that. So that is what I'm reclaiming. Yeah.
nice. No, I love it.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Well, that's what we're reclaiming for this week. And, next time we'll reclaim something different.
It sounds good.
Thanks.